They say that if you stand in front of the abandoned brick schoolhouse at midnight, you can hear the faint scratching of chalk against a blackboard. No wind, no movement, just that sound, slow, deliberate, as though a teacher still lingers, writing out lessons for students who will never graduate. The windows are cracked, the wood is rotting, but the silence feels too alive. Some locals swear they've seen shadows moving inside the classrooms, silhouettes of children sitting perfectly still in rows, waiting, always waiting. The story of that school is older than anyone in town wants to admit. They don't talk about it at the diner, or during church gatherings, or even in hushed gossip among neighbors. It's as though by not speaking the name, they can make the building vanish from memory. But it doesn't vanish. The schoolhouse sits there, a rotting monument to something no one dares to face. 12 desks inside remain untouched, as though waiting for their owners. And 12 names, burned into whispers, etched into fear, are what keep people away. The year was 1954 when the first disappearance was recorded. A boy, 12 years old, went to class in the morning but never returned home. His books were found on the desk, his pencil sharpened to a perfect point. But he was gone. The teacher claimed he had never shown up that day. His parents tore the school apart searching for him. Nothing. Not a footprint, not a torn scrap of clothing, nothing. The boy had been there, and then he wasn't. And in the days that followed, the other students began to whisper that he hadn't left at all. They said they could still see him, sitting quietly in the back row, though when anyone looked, the desk was empty. What makes the schoolhouse more terrifying is that this didn't happen once. It didn't happen twice. It happened 12 times. 12 children vanished, all in the same classroom, under the same teacher, and no explanation was ever given. Some parents pulled their children out of the school, swearing never to let them step foot in that building again. Others clung to denial, convincing themselves that the children had simply run away. But the town knew. Deep down, they all knew. What no one can explain is how the desks remain. Even now, decades later, if you step into the crumbling classroom, there are 12 wooden desks aligned in neat rows. Each one has carvings etched deep into the surface, initials, doodles, unfinished math problems, words scratched so violently into the wood that it splintered. Locals swear the carvings weren't there before. They appeared after the children vanished, as if the desks themselves remembered what the world tried to forget. There's one desk in particular that unsettles people the most. The third desk in the second row. Visitors have described sitting in it and feeling an overwhelming cold crawl up their spine, so strong that some collapse into tears without knowing why. On the desk, faint but unmistakable, is a sentence carved into the wood. "We are still here." No one knows who wrote it. The town has tried everything to rid itself of the schoolhouse. Twice, men with bulldozers were sent to tear it down. Both times, the machines broke before even touching the bricks. Another attempt was made to set it on fire, but the flames refused to take hold. The building remains, as if something deep within refuses to be destroyed. And so it stands, slowly decaying, yet never falling, a cage for whatever lingers inside. There are stories of people who dared to enter after dark. Teenagers, mostly, chasing the thrill of fear. They say the air inside is thick, like breathing through water. You can't hear your own footsteps, but you can hear others. Shoes scuffing, chairs creaking, whispers just behind your ear. One girl swore she saw a boy staring at her from the front of the classroom, his face pale, his eyes completely black. She blinked and he was gone. When she turned to run, the door she had entered through was no longer there. It took her 3 hours to find her way out, though her friends claimed she was gone less than 5 minutes. But the most haunting part of this story isn't the disappearances, or the failed demolitions, or the whispers of ghosts. It's the teacher. No one remembers her name now, not really. It's been erased from records, scrubbed from yearbooks, even blacked out in newspaper clippings. But every older resident remembers her face. Tall, severe, always dressed in dark clothes, with eyes that seemed to linger too long on the children sitting before her. When the first child vanished, she claimed ignorance. By the 12th, she was gone too. Some say she vanished into the walls of the classroom itself. Others whisper she was never human at all. The children who disappeared were never found, but sometimes their voices are heard. Parents who live nearby tell of waking in the night to hear laughter drifting through the air, light and playful, the sound of recess echoing in a place long abandoned. And then, without warning, the laughter stops, replaced by screams so piercing that the blood runs cold. One man, a janitor who had once worked at the school, swore he heard the children calling his name years after it had been shut down. He entered the classroom and found the blackboard covered in writing. Over and over, in a dozen different hands, the words stretched across the slate. "Don't leave us." He fled and never returned. He drank himself to death months later, muttering about the ones in the desks. What unsettles researchers, paranormal investigators, and even skeptics is how consistent the reports are. People who have never met, who don't know the history, describe the same details. The 12 desks, the carvings that shift when you're not looking, the sound of chalk, the sense of being watched by eyes that no longer belong to this world. Some even claim the building changes, depending on who enters. A hallway appears where there wasn't one before, or a staircase that leads to a locked door with scratching behind it. The schoolhouse adapts, as if it doesn't want you to leave once you've stepped inside. And yet, despite all this, the building draws people in. Something about it feels magnetic, irresistible, as though the story of those 12 children demands to be heard. But the more you listen, the more dangerous it becomes. There are accounts of people who spent too long staring at the desks, who swore they could see faint outlines of children sitting in them, transparent, motionless. They said if you look too long, the outlines sharpen, until you can see their eyes staring back at you. That's when things go wrong. One man who spoke of it vanished from his home the following week. His bed was made, his front door locked, his belongings untouched, but he was gone. Even now, people refuse to let their children walk near the schoolhouse. Bus routes are changed to avoid it. Streetlights near it burn out faster than anywhere else in town. Animals won't go near the property line. Dogs whimper, cats hiss. Even birds avoid the roof. Something inside has claimed that place, and it doesn't intend to let go. But perhaps the most haunting part isn't what happened in the past, but what continues to happen. Just last year, a man driving home late at night swore he saw lights flickering in the classroom windows. He stopped his car and stared, and what he saw froze him. Children were moving inside, dozens of them, shadows pacing the room. In the front stood the teacher, her face obscured by darkness, her hand raised as if giving a lesson. And then, all at once, they turned their heads toward him. Every single one. He fled before he could see what happened next. The Devil's Schoolhouse, that's what they call it now. A name born not from folklore, but from fear, because what happened there is too cruel to blame on anything else. 12 children never came home. 12 families never had closure. And the desks, waiting in silence, seemed to hold the weight of their absence. And if you listen closely enough, some say you can still hear them. A faint whisper beneath the dust and decay. A voice too young to belong to the dead. A plea too desperate to be ignored. There are photographs, though few people admit to owning them. Faded Polaroids taken by thrill seekers who broke into the schoolhouse decades after it closed. Most are blurry, the kind of distortion you'd expect from poor lighting and old film. But a few are clear enough to make people uneasy. In one, the classroom is empty, desks lined up in neat rows, dust floating in the air. Yet in the corner of the frame, barely visible, is a face, small, pale, with hollow eyes that seem to follow you no matter how many times you turn the photo. The woman who took that picture swore she was alone. She said the camera began to click on its own, snapping photo after photo until the film ran out. When she developed them, nearly every frame showed something she hadn't seen with her own eyes. Shadows leaning over desks, outlines of children huddled together, and in one picture, a teacher's hand stretched across the blackboard, even though no teacher had stood there in decades. She destroyed most of the photographs, but a few survived, circulating quietly, passed around like cursed relics until the town refused to let them surface again. What makes the school so strange is how it doesn't seem bound by time. People who step inside often describe hearing bells ring, though the bell tower has long since collapsed. Others hear the shuffle of feet against polished floors, the echo of lessons being recited in unison. But when they open the classroom door, there's nothing, just a stale smell of decay and a silence so heavy it presses against your chest. One man who entered claimed that when he glanced at the chalkboard, it wasn't covered in dust. It was alive with writing. Long strings of equations, half-finished sentences, words scrawled in a frantic, looping hand. When he blinked, the board was clean again. There's one account that unsettles everyone who hears it. A mother once entered the schoolhouse, searching for her missing daughter. The girl had been dared by friends to step inside at dusk and hadn't come out. The mother, frantic, rushed in without hesitation. She found the classroom, but it wasn't empty. The 12 desks were occupied. Children sat perfectly still, their faces obscured by shadows, their eyes turned downward to their work. She swore one of them was her daughter, had bent over a notebook, pencil moving across the page. She screamed her name, but the child didn't look up. None of them did, and when she ran to the desk and touched her daughter's shoulder, her hand passed through empty air. The desk was vacant. Her daughter was gone. The next morning, the girl was found wandering the edge of town. She was barefoot, her clothes soaked as if she had been standing in rain no one else had seen. When asked where she'd been, she only repeated one phrase. She wouldn't let me leave. The girl never explained who she was. She never stepped foot near the schoolhouse again. People began to whisper about the teacher more than the children. They said her presence was stronger than anything else, that she lingered in the walls, her voice still filling the halls. Some say she never died, that she became part of the building itself. Others whisper she wasn't a woman at all, but something that had worn human skin long enough to fool everyone until the truth surfaced. The children were never victims of the building. They were hers. One story claims that during the school's final days, a priest was called to bless the classrooms. The parents demanded it, desperate for answers, desperate to protect the remaining students. The priest agreed, though reluctantly. He entered one morning and walked the length of the room, sprinkling holy water, reciting prayers under his breath. Witnesses said the air grew colder with every word he spoke, his breath visible in the sunlight. And then, as he raised the crucifix toward the blackboard, the cross snapped in his hands. The sound of breaking would echoed, so loud it shattered 3 windows. The priest fled and never returned. He gave no explanation, only muttered that there are places where God's voice cannot reach. It wasn't long after that the school was shut down. Officially, was closed due to structural instability. But everyone in town knew the truth. The children's desks remained, and no one dared move them. Even now, decades later, people claim the arrangement of the desk shifts on its own. One week they're perfectly aligned. The next they're scattered as though overturned in panic. But always, there are 12. Sometimes travelers pass through town, unaware of the stories, curious about the building. They don't stay long. One couple visiting from out of state entered the schoolhouse during the day, laughing about ghost stories and small-town superstition. When they returned to their car, every window was fogged from the inside. Written across the glass in small, uneven handwriting were the names of 12 children, none of which they recognized. When they checked later, they found those names belonged to the missing students. The couple never spoke of what else they saw, only that the sound of scratching followed them home. Even hundreds of miles away, they would wake in the night to the sound of pencils dragging across paper, desks creaking, a teacher's voice whispering just loud enough to make their blood run cold. Eventually, they moved, abandoning their home, but those who bought the house after reported the same sounds. The strange thing about the schoolhouse is that it doesn't just trap, it spreads. The closer you are to it, the more it lingers in you, like a disease you can't shake. Locals speak of dreams that don't feel like dreams at all. They wake up in the middle of the night, convinced they're sitting at one of the desks, pencil in hand, forced to write lines over and over until their fingers cramp. Some wake with splinters embedded in their palms, as if they'd been clutching the old wooden desk themselves. There are those who say the teacher still calls out to new students, that our class isn't finished, that the 12 are only the beginning. Every few years, a child goes missing from the town without explanation. Officially, they're runaways. Unofficially, People know where they've gone. No one dares to investigate. No one dares to step foot in that room and count the desks again. The most chilling story, whispered only by those who've seen it firsthand, is that sometimes the desks aren't empty at all. Sometimes, if you look quickly enough, you see children sitting there, heads bowed, lips moving as though reciting lessons. If you look longer, their faces lift, pale and expressionless, their eyes dark voids that swallow the light. They never speak. They only watch, as if waiting for you to take your seat. One visitor described the moment he realized too late that the classroom wasn't empty. He had been walking the rows, fascinated by the carvings on the desks. Names, initials, strange phrases scratched into the wood. He leaned down to trace one with his finger when he felt breath against his neck. Turning, he found himself face to face with a child no older than 12, but the child's skin was gray, stretched thin over bone, eyes entirely black. It whispered one word: sit. He ran and swore never to return. He said he couldn't sleep for weeks without hearing that command echoing in his mind. The town council once discussed bricking up the school entirely, sealing every window, every door, burying it beneath concrete, so no one could ever enter again. But when workers attempted to do it, they found themselves unable to finish. Tools went missing, cement wouldn't set, workers grew violently ill on the property. After 3 weeks of failed attempts, the project was abandoned. The school refused to be buried, and so it remains untouched. A skeleton of brick and wood, holding something alive inside. Children who never left. A teacher who never stopped teaching. Lessons written not in chalk, but in whispers carried on the wind. And if you ever dare to stand in that classroom, you might find yourself staring at the blackboard, unsure when you began to move, unsure when the chalk found its way into your hand. You will write words you don't remember learning, in a language you don't understand. And behind you, the desks will creak, one by one, as 12 heads lift in unison. They will not blink. They will not breathe. They will only watch. And then you'll hear it. The sound no one forgets. The sound that freezes your heart. The teacher's footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching from the corner of the room where no door exists. And when she speaks, it is not with the voice of this earth. Class is not dismissed. There are moments when school feels less like a building and more like a wound. A scar on the earth that refuses to heal, festering beneath layers of dust and silence. The strangest thing is how it changes, depending on who speaks of it. For some, it is a place of whispers and shadows, of faint chalk scratching and children's laughter turned sour. For others, it's something darker, an endless hallway where time loops back on itself, where you can walk for hours and never reach the same door twice. A truck driver once swore he passed the schoolhouse 4 separate times in one night, though he never turned his wheel. He claimed the road bent toward it, dragging him back like a magnet. Every time he passed, another window glowed with dim, yellow light, as though one by one the classrooms were being filled. By the 4th time, every window shone, and he could see children pressed against the glass, the small hands fogging the panes, their faces pale and unblinking. He did not return to that route. The teacher's presence seemed strongest in stories told by those who lingered too long inside. One man, a local historian, dared to map the schoolhouse, determined to prove the supernatural claims were nothing more than hysteria. He entered at dawn, carrying a tape recorder and notebook. Hours later, he staggered out, face ashen, eyes wide with terror. The notebook he carried was filled with handwriting that wasn't his own. 12 distinct scripts, each one scrawling a single message across every page. She made us right. The tape recorder captured something worse. At first, it was his steady breathing, the scratch of pen on paper, the creak of floorboards. Then, faintly, the sound of chalk against slate. A woman's voice began to hum, low and tuneless, almost like a lullaby. Minutes later, the recorder picked up screams, dozens of them, children's voices crying out in unison, and then silence. The historian never spoke of what he saw inside. He left town within a week. People whisper that the teacher's face is never the same twice. Some describe her as young, severe, with dark hair pulled tight and eyes sharp enough to cut. Others see an older woman, gaunt and hollow-cheeked, her eyes milky and expressionless. A few claim she has no face at all, only a smooth expanse of skin where her features should be. Always, though, she stands at the blackboard, hand raised, ready to teach a class no one should ever attend. There are children in town who have never been near the schoolhouse, never dared to step within sight of its walls, yet they dream of her. They wake in the night with chalk dust on their fingers, words written backwards across their skin. Parents whisper of finding arithmetic problems scrawled in ash on the bedroom floor, or faint outlines of desks pressed into the carpet as though something invisible had rearranged the room while they slept. These children always seem drawn toward the school, as though some invisible thread tugs them closer with each passing day. One family moved away after their son vanished from his bed in the middle of the night. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. Just his blanket neatly folded at the foot of the mattress, his shoes lined up beside the bed. Weeks later, a man exploring the schoolhouse claimed he saw a new carving on one of the desks. It was the boy's name. The police dismissed it, but the townspeople knew. The number never changes, always 12. If one child disappears, a desk grows empty, waiting. When it's filled again, the carvings shift, the balance restored. There's a legend that if you sit at one of the desks long enough, you'll feel a hand slip into yours. Small, cold, trembling. If you hold on, if you refuse to let go, you'll hear a voice whispering in your ear. Some say it's the child who once sat there, begging for help. Others say it's the teacher herself, testing whether you'll obey her command to stay. No one who admits to holding that hand has ever described what happens next. What unsettles the bravest investigators is how the building resists being recorded. Cameras malfunction, batteries drain, video shows static, or worse, images that weren't visible to the naked eye. Children standing in the corners, shadows moving against the walls, the blackboard filling with words. A team once set up motion detectors in the hallway. 4 hours, nothing happened. Then, every single device activated at once, flashing and shrieking, as though dozens of figures had rushed past in unison. When the investigators played back the audio, they heard children's voices chanting a lesson in perfect rhythm. The words were incomprehensible. Not English, not any language scholars could recognize. But the cadence was unmistakable, a classroom in session. Some wonder if the teacher was practicing something forbidden, lessons meant not for children, but for something else entirely. That the schoolhouse was never just a school, but a place of ritual. The desks, the blackboard, the repetition of words, tools to bind, to summon, to hold. If that's true, then the 12 students were not victims of chance. They were chosen, and if they were chosen, then the class is not finished. There's a pattern to the disappearances, if you look closely enough. Each child was taken on the same day of the month, each from the same classroom, each at the same hour, and each one was the 12th to arrive that morning. What began as coincidence hardened into ritual until the townspeople realized too late that something was feeding through those children. Something that demanded 12, no more, no less. It explains why the desks can't be moved, why the building won't collapse, why the flames refuse to consume it. The schoolhouse isn't a ruin. It's a vessel. There's a man who claims to have seen the ritual play out, though no one knows if he's telling the truth. He said he stood outside one stormy night, lightning flashing across the sky, and through the window he saw them, the 12 children seated motionless, their faces glowing faintly in the dark. At the blackboard, the teacher wrote symbols that bent and twisted even as he watched. He said the children's mouths open in unison, their voices rising like a single note, vibrating through the air until the glass and the windows shook. He fled before the lightning struck again, afraid of what he might see if he stayed. Perhaps the cruelest detail in all of this is that the children are never described as violent. They don't chase. They don't scream. They don't attack. They only sit waiting, their eyes locked on whoever dares to enter. It's not malice that fills the schoolhouse, but sorrow. A sorrow so deep it has curdled into something else, something endless. And yet, there are those who insist that children aren't trapped, that they aren't victims at all, that they remain by choice, students loyal to their teacher even beyond death, bound not by fear but by devotion. If that's true, then the question isn't who the teacher was. It's what she promised them, and what she continues to promise to anyone who steps too close. There are whispers of a 13th desk. Not always, not for everyone, but some who enter the schoolhouse swear that when they count, there are not 12 but 13. A desk in the very back, smaller than the rest, with deep grooves cut into the surface, as if it had been clawed at from the inside. No one agrees on what's written there, because what's carved into the wood seems to change depending on who looks. One man saw the word forgive. A woman claimed it read forever. A child whispered that it said her name. And when each of them looked away and back again, the carvings had shifted, twisting into new words that should not have existed in the first place. That desk is said to be hers, the teacher's, the anchor that binds the schoolhouse in place. And maybe that's why it can't be destroyed. Maybe the wood itself has been fed with too much devotion, too much blood, too much fear. One old caretaker, long before the building was abandoned, told a story about the teacher that chills even now. He said he once caught her alone in the classroom after dark, standing at the blackboard. But she wasn't writing lessons. She was whispering into the air, her hand pressed flat against the slate, her fingers bleeding where her nails had broken. He swore the blackboard was absorbing the blood, swallowing it like water into sand. And when she stepped back, words appeared in a language he couldn't understand, glowing faintly in the dark. He left that night and never returned to his job. What unsettled him most wasn't the words. It was the feeling that something had whispered back. If you ask the oldest residents, the ones who remember the first children to vanish, they'll tell you the teacher had no family, no past. She appeared one year, filling the position of the previous schoolmistress who had died suddenly. No one knew where she came from. She lived alone, walked alone, never bought food from the market, never attended church. Yet her eyes seemed to hold the weight of centuries, as though she carried something older than the town itself. The strangest part, records of her employment are missing. Every file, every document erased. But the children remembered her. The ones who didn't vanish spoke of her in whispers, claiming she knew their secrets before they said a word. That she could tell who was lying, who was afraid, who had nightmares they couldn't explain. She called on them by name even when they hadn't raised their hands. She never smiled, and when she punished them, she didn't need to raise her voice. A single look was enough to make their bones feel cold. Some believe she was searching for something, that the 12 children were not victims, but vessels, each one carrying a piece of something larger, something she was trying to summon or awaken. Others believe the opposite, that she was protecting the town by binding the 12 in place, keeping something darker from escaping. But if that's true, then why do their voices still echo in the night? Why do their names appear on windows and walls, written by unseen hands? The last known attempt to document the schoolhouse came from a journalist in the 1980s. She spent 3 nights in the building, recording everything. Her notes described strange time lapses, the sense of being watched, and the constant smell of burning paper. On the final night, she wrote that she felt compelled to sit at one of the desks. She fought the urge but eventually gave in, saying it was like her body no longer belonged to her. She wrote for hours, filling page after page with strange diagrams and words she didn't recognize. When dawn broke, she staggered out, the notebook clutched to her chest. Neighbors found her wandering the road, eyes vacant, lips moving as if reciting something only she could hear. She never recovered. The notebook disappeared, taken by authorities who refused to release it. And yet, pieces of it leaked. Photocopies, grainy and hard to read. Circles drawn around numbers, rows of symbols, and one line written clearly in English. She won't stop until the lesson is finished. That's the heart of it, isn't it? The lesson is never finished. The class is never dismissed. The children, whether trapped or devoted, remain because the bell never rang for them. The teacher stands eternal at the blackboard, her voice looping through the decades, waiting for more, always waiting. There are those who think if you stay in the classroom long enough, if you sit in silence and listen, you will hear her lesson, not in words, but in meaning, a shape that begins to take hold in your mind, twisting, pulling, stretching your thoughts into something else. People who claim to have heard it never speak of what it was. They only weep, or laugh in ways that don't sound like laughter at all. It makes you wonder, what if the schoolhouse isn't cursed? What if it's teaching? Not arithmetic, not spelling, but something older, darker. A curriculum carved into the bones of the earth itself. And those who enter aren't victims, they're students. Students who never graduate because the lesson is eternal. If you walk past the school on a rainy night, when the moon hides and the world feels hollow, you might see them. Children in neat rows, pale hands folded on desks, their lips moving in perfect rhythm. And if you dare to look at the blackboard, you'll see the teacher's hand dragging chalk in slow, deliberate lines, spelling out a name. Sometimes it's your name. That's why the town avoids it. That's why no one dares to speak of it too loud. Because the schoolhouse listens. It waits for the curious. It waits for those who think they can uncover its secrets. But secrets here aren't uncovered. They're taught. And once the lesson begins, it doesn't let you leave. The Devil's Schoolhouse stands as a reminder of what happens when the past refuses to stay buried. 12 children lost. A teacher erased from history. A building that will not fall. And maybe, just maybe, the real question isn't why the 12 never left. It's why the rest of us are still allowed to leave at all. If you've made it this far, you're already part of the story. You've walked the halls in your mind. You've heard the scratching of chalk. You've felt the 12 desks waiting. And the truth is, stories like this spread because they're meant to spread. Because the more people who listen, the stronger they become. So stay with us. Don't turn away. The story isn't finished. Not yet. And if you want more of these tales, if you want to keep walking deeper into the shadows where history and horror blur together, then make sure you don't miss what comes next. Subscribe, watch till the end, and keep your eyes open. Because sometimes the next name written on the blackboard belongs to the one who stopped listening.